I'm glad this was able to work out.
Me too. I'm so sorry that the time got discombobulated.
It's okay. It's okay. I looked at my phone. I just ended consultations for the day and I was like, huh? So I just popped out here.
Gosh, sorry. If you need some time to ground, definitely take it.
Oh, you were good. I'm actually I met with some wonderful folks today and I'm happy to be able to be here and jump on this. So I'm excited.
Awesome. I love your necklace today too. It's gorgeous.
Thank you. I did a blank because I was like, I don't know where I came from. Otherwise, I would be like, hey, everybody, this is where I came from. But thank you.
No problem. We can just admire it, which is also something worth doing. So,
Acceptable.
yeah.
Well, cool. I don't know how far you got in your live or if we're kind of starting things up or
Yeah,
where
we
you
kind
kind
of
of want
did
to go with it.
a Libra season equinox Q&A to kick things off. So, yeah, but with Libra season, of course, does come the exchange of value, which is very on point for things like money blocks. So it's a perfect segue.
Perfect. Awesome. Um, let's see. I have to owe it to you and Emily because it was both of you who kind of introduced this idea of limiting beliefs. And that kind of construct in itself has been so helpful for me when I'm looking at my own life and analyzing what I've picked up that helps and maybe used to help at a particular time, but is no longer helping where I am in this life. And I think money blocks, I mean, for me, certainly lines with that very specifically. Um,
Yes.
and I was curious, one, I'd like to share some of where like I found my money blocks over the years, if you would be open to doing that as well. But kind of before I get into that, can you like offer a brief explanation? What are we talking about when we're talking about money blocks?
Yeah. So money blocks are something that so many of us have just innately. If you've ever been afraid of growing up being an adult and dealing with bills, you have money blocks. In fact, that is one. So basically, a limiting belief is a belief that we picked up along the way, often in childhood, that we took either from a situation or in order to remain safe in a situation. And then once we got out of that situation, it still remained our personal law and our personal rule. And then later in life, it holds us back in areas where it doesn't need to anymore because perhaps that situation is safe, but we need to reconvince our subconscious and our spirit that it is. And so, one of the techniques that Em and I found a lot of our stuff on is the theta healing technique, which is really quick and efficient in helping to resolve and change limiting beliefs. And a big one, the most common one, of course, comes around the resources that support our livelihood, which is often in the form of money blocks.
Mhm, mhm. Um, okay, I'm curious if you could explain this. I you said theta, and then my brain went black. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah. So theta is the brainwave. It's the name of the brainwave we use when we're sleeping or when we're imagining. So if you're watching TV and zoned out, you're probably in theta, in your theta brainwave. When you're about to fall asleep and you get all those really good ideas, you're entering into the theta brainwave. And when you are experiencing a dream, you are in the theta brainwave. We tap into it consciously and on purpose when we do certain meditations, and we use it in theta healing to go into that brainwave where we sort of are when we make beliefs, and we change them there so that we can process them more smoothly.
I love that. And correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm certainly not claiming to be a psychologist here, but that is can be used in psychological healing and that sort of thing, right?
Yeah, it's the same brainwave for hypnosis as well. And if you're using EMDR, oftentimes I have noticed with my own therapy and work that it's the same brainwave you kind of tap into there.
Mhm. This is why I also say, for anybody out there that's like, oh man, I wish I was psychic, you can be. You probably already are.
Yeah. If you
Because it's just,
believe yourself, it's probably existent somewhere.
mhm, mhm. I appreciate with, more science on the psychic mindset really that's going into theta. And one of the things I tell people, it's like the difference between anybody and perhaps the person who calls themselves psychic is you're aware of when you're in that state, you're aware of how to utilize that state. So yeah, please know everybody, you don't have to be born psychic. I think everybody kind of is, just realizing your language, but it's also something you can work on and grow, and theta state's wonderful to do that in.
Yeah.
Um, so, money blocks. If you don't mind going down a little bit of memory road with me, I wanted to talk a little bit about how I got mine.
They sneak up. How did it happen?
Uh, so I would say first, it was the religious institution that I was a part of. I I don't feel the need to necessarily go into the specifics of what that was, because I think a lot of different religious institutions have these blocks. And it is the block that money is bad, money is of a particular bad deity, that we are undeserving of money, that we are undeserving of wealth. Or the other side of it was I would see some leaders teaching this message, and they would oftentimes quote the Bible with the woman who went to the temple and gave her last coin to the temple. And they're like, be like that. All the while, I grew up, I'm not going to sit here and say poverty, but I experienced some things that were not great. Uh, and I would be experiencing that, like, sort of thing. And then I would look at these guys who were telling me spend your last quarter to give to the institution, and they weren't hungry, they weren't homeless. So already the money blocks kind of grew from there because it was the understanding of like, oh, this is bad, but they can have it, but I guess I can't have it. Or if I want to be the most wholesome, or if I want to be the most giving, or the most represented by a higher power, I have to give all. So that's really where it began. Also, thanks for the gifts, everybody. It began with wanting to be good enough for a deity. It began with never feeling good enough for the deity. And it began with me feeling like I had no right to the possession of my own things. Otherwise, that would make me bad or prideful or in danger of eternal damnation or what have you. Um, and it's been a ride because I often talk about like money blocks, so I consider wealth and all of what wealth means. I think wealth for me starts here. It starts with mental health and understanding what I have, how far I've come. Um, but I know too, other parts of my money blocks came from when I was still hopping and essentially houseless and living in DC. So there's just a lot to kind of unpack there that I've had to unpack over the years, but also for me, it's also been a lot of desperation. Oh man, I never want to be like that again. Oh no, what if I have to do this? What if I have to do that? So really the money block thing is a lot of mental health related stuff of worth and what one feels worthy of having, at least in my experience. So a little vague, but I feel like that's specific enough. Thoughts, or would you like to share something?
I feel like a lot of what you said is so on point and translates across many spectrums because many of us grew up in certain backgrounds where we were told what you have is not really yours. And so if that's not mine, what is? And then you get this whole quandary of like, what am I allowed to keep and what do I have to share? I would argue that a lot of the emphasis on sharing in childhood also creates a lack mentality. And so it's that you have to remain in lack, but if you're in lack, you're also in survival mode. And then you're struggling to maintain your survival, which puts you in a place of not being able to be as benefic or helpful to other people because you're much more concerned about how am I going to get to my next step to be able to maintain some form of comfort. And that creates a lot of attachment to the resources that get us those comforts, often in the form of money. But I totally agree with you. For every Sunday it was the offering plate, or every time you had something, it was, should I feel okay having this? Am I allowed to have it? Like even back into when I tap into my memories and I think, where did I learn this? One of the first things we see, even when you're watching Aladdin as a kid, is Aladdin, the street rat, gives his bread away when he just worked really hard for it. And so we have this conditioning in a lot of different phases of our society, whether the deity is a god or a deity, or it's our society, or it's our caregivers. In one form or another, a lot of us were given the impression that you have to be so grateful for something that you're not allowed to keep. And then you have to keep striving for that thing. And so it really is, it breaks down to when you think about the limiting belief, one of the things that Em and I have noticed, and Em states this beautifully a lot of the time, is that it's also about security and trust. If you have security and you have the ability to trust something, you feel safe, and then you're all good with it. But if you don't, then you feel that lack, and you're trying to pull in, and you're trying to find this thing that is missing without a definition of what that is. So it's even harder to attract abundance because you don't know what abundance is because you never learned the definition of it. It's another aspect of theta healing, ironically, is understanding like the creator's definition of love, of trust, of joy, so that you know what you're looking for and what you're actually trying to draw in. And that's one of my favorite aspects of working with money blocks, is not necessarily working on attracting the money itself, but on attracting the thing that the money would get me. So it's like, what would I use the money for? What do I actually want? And if it's a sense of security and things like that, that's totally valid. It doesn't have to be super specific, like a new MacBook or whatever. But you can say, I want this specific thing. And then resources might conspire in unconventional ways to make that happen. I'm someone with Sagittarius in the second house, and a lot of fortune in the eighth, which translates astrologically into not a whole lot of stability and not a lot of my own resources that I've been able to gather into myself. So I've had to really learn through life experience that what I need is going to be there when I need it, and I'll just be resourceful in the moment when something arrives. But often I'm impressed with how things do work out, even though I never know how they're going to.
I love what you said, and I wanted to highlight that. What I need is going to be there when I need it. Something similar with how I started to break down these blocks over time. I remember I started saying this back in DC. I remember I was a day away from moving to a campground, like moving there for the foreseeable future and living out of a car. And I remember there was this man who was asking for money, and he looked at me and he said, "Hey, I'm homeless." And I looked at him and I said, "Me too." And it was like a very strange sort of like scene and scene. And we were both, because he didn't, from what I was wearing, and granted I didn't have that much clothing at the time, but what I was wearing, I was job interviewing and that kind of thing. He looked at me and he was just like, "But you can't be." And I was like, "I am." It was after that night that I started to say something to myself, and it didn't feel right at the time. It didn't stick because I didn't believe it yet. But it was, I have the money I want whenever I want it. I say that with confidence now. It took me years. And even so, I'm still having to deconstruct what the money I want even means to me. For a while, it was the money I want to pay my bills. For some of it, it was the money I want to eat out with my friends. And that definition has grown over time, but I say it to myself just as kind of like the money I want is there whenever I want it. And in doing that, it also deconstructs what want is in the first place. The other thing I wanted to bring up was I read a book that it was like a self-help book like 8 years ago. I think it was called like the Life Principles or something. Anyway, he talks about boxes that we put ourselves in, boxes of worth, and how that can not be great for manifesting. Because if we believe that we have to be in a state of spending in order to survive, or we have to be in a state of troubles with finances, etc., we won't leave that box. And I see that with so many people who are having these troubles because they never see themselves as worthy to be outside of that box. They never allow themselves to relax. It's when people come into all kinds of abundance and then have it be gone in a year because they never applied the feeling of just having resolve with their funds. They always had to be spending because that's what they were used to. And they also kind of manifested it with other things of taking their money as well. That's another thing that I talk to people about. My money is mine to use when I want to. My money is mine. I kind of went on a tangent. Thoughts?
So yeah, I think one of the things that we do is we minimize our own worth. But also in the same time, the thing that I've always had a struggle with growing up was putting other people on unnecessary pedestals. And so somehow this person is unreachable for a reason that is unknown and unknowable, which is your first hint that there's something disconnected there. Because just life in general is not as complicated or as hard to figure out as some people who want us to remain small will tell us. And so in our cases, you think about what you believe you're capable of, and then if you actually draw in more of that subconsciously, like you said, you might actually get rid of it as fast as you can, because that's outside of the safety zone. That's outside of the known. And then the subconscious is like, well, we don't know what to do if we have all of this. We obviously, have a belief of like, I'm irresponsible with money. And so you become irresponsible with money because someone told you you don't know the value of a dollar or something. And so I think redefining your worth and just even saying like, I'm capable of anything I want to do, or I deserve anything I have and anything that, comes into my sphere. And then see what comes for you and see how much you deserve. That's probably more than you would have given yourself credit for. And then when you've exercised this expansion of yourself, you can even move on into the, okay, well, I know I deserve everything, or I deserve anything, so I would like this in my life. And then you can kind of narrow it down. But I think one of the most fun things to do is let the universe impress you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I see a great question from one of my commenters, Lisa. That's my mod. Hi. She's asking, what about the mental health issue of buying things for self-satisfaction? What would you say about that?
Within your means, I think, if you're going to be someone like me who budgets, you have a space in your budget for self-satisfaction. And that way you're not denying it just because you're maintaining an awareness of your resources. But also you're saying, I'm not going to take myself into an unsafe place. I have this much, and maybe I have extra from last month or more to put towards next month or whatever. But I think you should always budget, whether it's your time, your money, your resources, your appreciation for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Something that I did for a little while when I was very uncertain about where my funds were coming from next. For anybody who's not familiar with this, I was working as a professional producer, performer, and playwright for pretty much all of my professional life up until 2020 for obvious reasons. And even as I was getting more money and I was becoming more successful with various projects, because I was having insecurities about where my next gig was coming from or how long something would last, which is something to deconstruct in itself. Whenever I was having troubles with finances, sometimes I would look at the years that I made the least amount of money. And I would look at those years and I would say, okay, I made it through that. I can do this. And sometimes I would apply what I could from my present budget and kind of make an amalgamation between my past budget and my present budget. One thing that I did, I celebrate my bottom of the line things that have happened in my life. I remember the first year that I was living in DC, I only made $13,000. Me being alive and staying there is actually a miracle because that's nothing in DC. Yeah. So I celebrate my ingenuity. I celebrate who I worked with in order to get out of that, to work with it. I celebrate everything about that time rather than looking at it as a crutch. But I also look at it as hey, if I can do that, and yeah, it was uncomfortable. Like, I don't really want to go back to that time of my life. However, the lessons that I learned from that year affect me forever. And so now I'm at a place where it's like, I'm able to say, okay, what can I keep and celebrate versus what can be released because it's no longer serving. And I think a lot of people at this point, a lot of y'all have lived a lot of life. What can you look back at the hard times and celebrate and say, you know what, well, if I have to go back to that, I will, but I don't think I do.
My now husband and I lived in Manassas for a while when we first moved in together. He was working at a local university. I was the manager at the local Disney store. And I was filling 3 roles and getting paid part-time, but working about 60 hours a week. And we were on a very tight budget, and I was still in a lot of fear over budget because I had left a relationship where when the other person left, they took all of my money. Yeah, lots of us have been there. But our anniversary that year stands still to this day as kind of our favorite because we couldn't afford anything. So what we did was we went to Costco for hors d'oeuvres and desserts, and we sampled around, and the people there, we told them, like, I'm in my Disney costume, right? Like khaki pants and a terrible shirt. And he's still dressed from George Mason. And we're just going around being like, it's our anniversary. And they would give us like extra cake samples, and it was wonderful. And then we went to IKEA, and we bought ourselves one $20 piece of furniture to celebrate that we were living together. And we still have it to this day. And this year, 8 years later, we just went to, we instead on our anniversary went to Pottery Barn and bought ourselves like a ceramic tea kettle to honor where we were, that was Costco and IKEA anniversary and still the best. But now we have a ceramic kettle that shows how far we've come. And it's so silly and small, but it's just something that means a lot to us because this is the first year we had a lot of financial struggles last year as well. And this is the first year that we have both feet on the ground. And it's something that we are definitely celebrating.
Um, I love that. That's beautiful. I love that so much. I think too, those who are like tried and true in one's life, like so long as you're doing what you can to keep yourself in check, it's like those are the beautiful moments that we can celebrate. Like my friends have seen me anywhere between making about 10 grand a year to significantly more. Like just because my income's always like this, and that's where I find comfort now, which is a funny thing for me. I used to crave knowing how much I was going to make each year. Now I'm just like, well, I always kind of, for me, and this helps me, and I think it's just how my brain works. I'm always like, well, if I have to live out of my car, I will. Because that's not scary to me anymore, because I've done it. And I came out okay. Um, it's healthy for me, and I know it won't be for everybody because we're all in different places. It's healthy for me to be like, whoa, that's where I came from. And if ever I need to go back, I will. But right now, like I don't have to. And that's cool too.
Yep. Yeah, the neutrality of both, I think, is a really amazing energetic skill and a tool to be able to use of like, I can, but I don't need to right now.
Mhm.
And just giving yourself that permission to honor and accept and appreciate, but then to say, I'm in a different place. It was beautiful. We can do something different, and it doesn't have to be any different kind of judgment.
Mhm.
I think our judgments of ourselves are the things that get us the most when it comes to things like that.
For sure. And I just got a ping in regards to part of what you were saying to a previous partner of yours. Um, I think it is so important for each individual to know, whether consciously or unconsciously, where your brain tells you your money goes. Um, I I don't want to get too far into like personal things, but for a long time, I had set myself up with a limiting belief that my money was somebody else's, that it was not mine. And when I got out of this situation, I realized I started spending more on things that okay, for example, I got some nice foundation, which go figure I'm not actually wearing today. But I got some nice foundation. It was nicer than like the typical drugstore brand that I would get. And no hate towards drugstore brand, I still go back. But I remember I got it and I was like, this is really nice. I've never allowed myself to get nice brand stuff before. And it was in that moment that I realized I had set myself up the limiting belief that my money was not my own. So from that, I would just say check yourselves. It's one thing for it to be your kids. It's one thing. It's another thing when you may not even be aware of what money is yours and why. Um, I've seen that with some of the strongest people that I know. It's not just a me thing, where I've seen strong folks in different partnerships. Like, oh, because I can, I should. And it's always like, sometimes you can on each other, but sometimes it's like, ooh, is that going too far? kind of thing.
I I have a family that comes from I come from a long line of we're gonna go to this place because when Hurricane Katrina happened, we went down to Mississippi and helped clean up and rebuild. I've been to like 20 different countries, all in the sake of going to help people or rebuild camps there or hand out clothes and all sorts of things. And so growing up, I watched my mom live out the inherited belief that we have to earn our worth and our love by giving all of our resources. And she ended up buying half the town's dilapidated buildings when she finally came into financial stability and abundance with her self-made company. She bought the ugliest buildings she could find. She financed them being renovated. She even brought in things that the state said the city needed to be able to rebuild itself and revitalize, and tried to run a restaurant for several years, even though she had no idea how to run a restaurant. And then all these other things. And only just this year, she's finally seeing the return on that by being able to release them and sell them. And part of what I think the secret there is her parents have now passed, and she has no one else with expectations of her to live up to. And so it's freed her in a sense. You know, we miss them. They were wonderful people. But I think that kind of did help her resolve an inherited belief in resources. And we think about this, right? So many of our generations in so many contexts have come from lack, survival, all those things. And so it may not even be our personal lifetime or generation, but it might be what our parents went through, what their parents went through. And these things that, my favorite example is like a secret family recipe from great great grandma that has this ingredient in the bread, and we don't know why. And it's because great great grandma was living in the Great Depression or something, and so had to substitute it. And we're still using it today like it's normal, even though it was a substitution out of necessity, and we don't need to do that anymore. So sometimes our beliefs are in the same way. Like you can give yourself the quality recipe.
Mhm. For sure. I just thought of one thing, especially in regards to like substituting recipes. It's so important to thank and acknowledge where you even got the limiting belief in the first place. Because I think that's another issue. Sometimes we're like, oh, we just want to get rid of it. We just want to lose it. The body recognizes us. So what it can also recognize instead is acknowledgement, appreciation. You're filling the wound with something. It's whenever I'm doing a healing with somebody, you never want to leave a wound open. You always want to like close it somehow. Like, so acknowledgement can be that thing, thanking that part of you for being like, hey, this helped me get to this place. Thank you. I'm good.
Yeah, I think another ping that I got earlier and now just returned is that a lot of us who are trying to use our talents and pursue our passions also have the belief that you can't be compensated for your especially if you're doing healing work or faith work or psychic work or things like that. We have this belief that you can't be paid for that. That's a spiritual gift. You need to just give it freely. But then people want your time, and so if you do it, you actually can't support yourself anymore because you're giving it so much. The cup is empty. There's nothing refilling it. And so I think it's really important to also understand the worth of your gifts and what you're capable of, and just know that your time is sort of a commodity in and of itself. My first mentor in psychic mediumship stressed this with me, that you need to be compensated for your time. You are giving your gift freely, but the time is something that you need, that you can ask for compensation for so that you are available to give it. So that mindset was huge for me back when I was like 19. And if it helps people, it's always nice to know that there is something that you can kind of guide yourself a half step to. You know, if it's really hard for you to believe that my spiritual gifts are worth an exchange of energy, then at least maybe it'll be easier to say that my time and my availability for other people is worth being exchanged for so that I can become available.
Yeah, and that brings up a good point. I think this goes certainly beyond just like the psychic side of thing, but anything that somebody may be passionate about or that you're giving your time and your effort and your energy for. One, for anybody, I know some people have been like, you shouldn't accept money for this. Well, I'm like, well, if you look at the traditional psychics over time, they may have been paid in food. They may have had their rent covered. They were still doing the jobs. They may have been paid in different ways. Energetic payment, whether that be actual money or something else. Maybe that was like provide a hen or something. Um, there's that side of things, but also exactly what you're talking about with time. I remember when I started charging for just general meetings because I was still kind of coming into being able to like actual do psychic stuff with folks because my limiting beliefs, but also growth. Um, I remember I was getting so overwhelmed with emails from, and I was working other jobs at the time, and I was getting so overwhelmed, and I was just like, look, I had to tell myself. It kind of got to a boiling point where I was just like, they're either going to help me to help them, or they're not, and they'll have to figure it out the way that I essentially had to figure out a lot of things. Um, so that's kind of the payoff. And I always say how grateful I am because I couldn't have predicted at the time that things would have grown as they have. But it started with people just asking questions. And then I was like, cool, can you pay me something so that I can answer this for you? And then it just has grown so much from there. But I think that's also, it says something about worth too, to be like, dude, I'm not worth anything if I'm exhausted. Like, I'm straight up not. The best I'm worth is like being able to sit on my bed and just like go to sleep, which is deserved. So,
And it's the same concept that you hear on an airplane every time you fly. Don't help someone put their oxygen mask on until you have yours on, because if you pass out, you're not helping anybody. And so my mom used to tell me that one. And I remind a lot of energetic practitioners of that as often as I can, because it's actually, if you need to be motivated by what you can give to others, which is in and of itself partially a limiting belief. It's great to want to help other people. That's beautiful. But to feel like you have to in order to have worth, that might be a limiting belief that you can work with. But until it's easy to work with that or to guide yourself to that, it's helpful to remind yourself that, like, if I can breathe, then I can help someone else. If I can't breathe, I'm not going to help anybody. And it's very important to remember self-maintenance and actually self-fulfillment.
and that's with anything, you know, with anything that anybody does, whatever you do to help other people, whatever you do to help yourself, like whether that turns into a professional venture or not, trades are not all monetary. So some of these money beliefs are directly connected to things like worth. So always a good time to think about that, reflect on it, that sort of thing. Um, one of the questions, I'm kind of circling back a little bit with what Lisa asked, talking about like when is it okay to buy little things and that sort of thing besides looking at your budget. One thing that came to mind is if you're concerned you're over purchasing on things, ask yourself why you're buying it. Ask yourself if there's something that's meant to fill for you that could be filled some other way through either acknowledgement, worth, creativity, encouragement. Scott, do you have something to add on that?
Yeah, actually, and also lyrical wonderling. I'm glad that this is exactly what you needed today. That's so good to hear. Um, this actually relates to all resources, right? It's not just the purchasing. This was me with food. So, as I was reaching into a cabinet, one of the things I trained myself for was, is this something I want right now? Or am I trying to hide from a feeling? Is this something that is just fun for me right now and fulfilling just because I deserve, something? Or am I hiding? Am I filling a void? All of those things. And that really does help you kind of gauge the healthy expression of something and the more limiting or challenging expression of something. I think that's a brilliant point.
Mm-hmm. Other thing I wanted to bring up, this was a ping from a little while ago, has to do with jealousy. Um, I'm taking a class. It's through it's called the Goddess Portal, which I love. We have like a local chapter here, and it's all about like empowerment, finding your inner goddess, etc. And there, we talked about bragging and jealousy. And at first, when our leader, her name's Annette, she's wonderful. Uh, she gave us all time to brag to each other, which all of us in the room, we were kind of like, whoa, bragging is bad. Like we were all like, that's a bad word. And she's like, no, you know your people when you can brag to them and they talk you up and they say, tell me more, thank you. But then they also return the conversation. But here's the thing, so many of us in the room, we were so willing to listen, but we were so unwilling to talk about what we had done. So what she did, and I encourage anybody watching this to consider doing this for yourself with a good friend or family member, set a timer for 3 minutes to brag. And the only thing the other person that's listening can say is good brag. So it's just this and this and this. And the coolest thing happened in this room. Like, you have all these pairs of people, and like everybody was smiling so much. Like throughout the 3 minutes, we just kept going like good brag, or talking. Um, Brag about money, brag about worth, like, but brag with the right people. And mark if you are jealous of other people's stuff, because that is a time for you to say, okay, why do I want what they have? Why can't I have what I want? And that was a big thing. She told us all, she's like, if you are jealous of the other person, ask them how they got there instead of just being jealous of what they have. Ask for how they can help you get to where you want to be through your own path. Because that's going to be unique every way, to figure out how you can get what they want. I think too, a lot of women presenting people in general, and I'm also going to go into non-binary because we're all in that kind of group together, I think, in the concept of like talking about money. I feel like a lot of us were told not to talk about money because it's rude or it's bragging or something. It's like, no, why can't we lift each other up and be like, whoa, you're making this much money? That's great. Like, keep going. How did you do that? Great job. you know?
Well, and it's also important to think about, if someone's upset with you, is that you that did that, or is that their own limiting belief coming out in a reaction? Because so often, if you think about how you're thinking about other people, you're not as preoccupied by them as you are by your status and your state of being and happiness. They're the same way. We have so much in common with each other fundamentally that we forget that that person, another mentor I had, called it like nobody cares about your salad dressing. They're not judging you for having ranch instead of olive oil. No one's looking that closely. And so in your life, thank you guys. If in life, if you're experiencing this fear of someone else having a feeling, they're having that feeling as part of their process. And the best thing you can do is lead by example for what it looks like to not be going through that anymore. So So leading by example is the greatest thing that I've ever reminded myself of when I'm worried, like, is this going to offend so and so if I'm successful or if I'm succeeding and I'm happy and I don't want to show it, so I don't clap my hands. So I like am holding myself back or dimming my light. Is that benefiting anybody if I'm teaching them, yeah, you did dim my light, or also it's okay to dim your light? I don't think that that's the most expansive way we can reach people. And I think if you show someone that it's not effective to sort of attack when someone else is successful, they also realize that that approach doesn't get them what they want either. And then they are one step more on their way, whether that way continues to involve you or not. And may it not for that period of time until they find themselves, and then you can help them find joy. But you're still showing them by example that joy is allowed.
Absolutely. I love that. Joy is allowed. Maybe that's
Exactly.
something for some of you to think about too. Where do you allow yourself joy? How can you allow yourself more joy?
Especially right now when so many people are struggling with so many different things, and it's like every day someone else has got something else. You almost feel bad for being happy because they're not. And so you look for the reason why you're not happy, and then you find one because you're looking for it. If you were looking for your reasons to be happy, to feel abundant, perhaps we'd find those as well. And it's not going to take away the fact that there are challenges. It's not going to heal someone else's challenges, but it is going to, again, keep you going enough so that when you can be helpful to someone else, if you have the abundance of energy to be able to give, it's there and you can be there for them or with them or celebrate with them and teach them what celebration looks like.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I had something and it was right on the topic. I guess it wasn't meant to be said. Okay, I'll just go with that. Yeah. Okay. Wow. I love that. My brain was just like, no, like, oh, well, goodbye. So I'll go to the second topic that also popped into my mind, um, which involves a bit of crafting. So I'm more of an energy worker myself. I'm not super into spellcraft personally, though I'm not going to knock it just because it certainly works for so many people. For some people, I think it will be good to build yourself up through doing meditative handcrafts. And I say that broadly because you could be like making a spell or you could be knitting a sweater. Like for me, I color, I guess that's my craft, or like I daydream, or I look at the sky and kind of zen for a little bit. Those are also ways to get into theta, and that's why spellcraft can be very cool as well. So maybe part of this is to say, even if you don't feel like you have those who you can brag to yourself. Have your own accomplishments, make that candle, where you can, whenever you have something cool or you're manifesting something cool in regards to your wealth and acknowledgement and money, you light it and you're just like, yeah, this is the feeling that I want. I'll get to that too. With manifesting, call the feeling to you, and I know you know this, like the feeling of not scraping by, the feeling of having a full stomach. And I know for me, having it be something other than rice and flavor. So, yeah, manifesting that sort of like thing to come to you. And then even when something small happens, you're training your brain to follow that, to be like, this is good. You like this. So acknowledge anything that you possibly can get when it's going in the direction that you want so that you feel more easy getting out of that box as you move forward.
And to your point, when you're calling something in, or when you're bragging to yourself, I always recommend writing it down, because then you can go back and read it later and remember the feeling, so that when you want to call in the feeling again, you can know what the feeling was like, because you felt it before.
Mhm.
And now you can say this, or better, this, but in this, different way. One of the things we're doing right now is we're trying to find a home. And so I do folk magic and astrology, and a lot of just energetic work. That energetic work is how I got my start when I was 10. And so I've been just looking at different ways to explore all of the options and see if I can like pull little pieces from all over the place and make a confluence of energies. Horary astrology to help me understand when the time is right. Different little like which candle color works for this, and I'm just like taking notes out of other people's pages for a while just to see. And it's also giving me something fun to do in the meantime, which I think is a really key manifesting trait. It's the as the thing is being drawn to you, how can you keep yourself joyful and occupied, or at least busy in the meantime? Being patient is the one thing that I was always told to be growing up, and I never could master because I didn't know what it was, because nobody ever told you what it was. It was just sitting and waiting, and I didn't want to do that. So I decided I can be patient if I can be occupied, if I can do something in the meantime. So my biggest thing for people is, if you are in a position where you're required to be patient, what can you do in the meantime that is going to help you detach from certain outcomes, fixate less on it in your anxiety, and then give you something joy filled to do in that meantime that's going to make it seem faster, if not draw it in faster tangibly.
Hmm. For sure. Two things that came to mind in general were one, risk gets more comfortable the more you get used to it. Sometimes risk may seem small to other people, which risk means different things for everybody. But following a feeling in particular, following what you feel is right. At first, if you're not used to following your feelings, it will feel like a risk. And your brain will be like, what's going on, essentially. But the more you do it, when you're following the feeling that you know is right, which is your intuition, the easier it's going to be. But you gotta give it a chance to actually reroute what's going on. Um, the other thing I wanted to mention was something one of my mentors, one of my business mentors, told me about years ago. I describe him as a mad genius. I love this guy. He would make all kinds of risks all the time. And he was the financial backer to my business when I was starting out in Raleigh. I had an immersive theater company there. And every week he'd call me up and he'd say, hey, how did you fail? And it wasn't a like, you suck kind of thing. He was like, how did you fail? And when he first started doing that, I was just like, Dad, what? And he's like, no, 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 tell me what didn't work out this week. And so I tell him because my brain, I'd always have it at the front of my brain of like how many times I messed up. Here's the thing. The more that I was able to acknowledge my failures, the easier it was to talk about them and see when they were happening in real time rather than letting them get me down or sneak up on me and make me have a crash and burn. It also, when I did have a big, what some might consider a failure, it allowed me to just talk about it and be like, okay, well, instead of beating myself up over it, what can I learn from it instead? So maybe, I don't know if failure is the right word, unless it's what people would feel more comfortable getting comfortable with. But like, think about that. Maybe to the person you brag with, talk about your failures first and then go into your brag story. Maybe keep failures to 30 seconds and then your brag be the rest of the 3 minutes.
Yeah, there's a song by, I think it's Shakira from Zootopia. And the one line is, nobody learns without getting it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so a failure, if you want to call it a failure, I think that's totally acceptable to just give it a name. But it's also a contribution to your education, a contribution to your future success. I consider it research. I think it was an experiment that the result of the experiment guided me towards the next experiment, and that one will be more successful than the previous because I know more. But research is like my total passion. So if I think about it in the context of something I already love to do, then this is just a step in the process. It's not something that I have to judge myself harshly for, especially since most of the time, again, with the salad dressing, other people are not going to be nearly as hard on you as you're willing to be on yourself.
Yeah, goodness. Well, I feel like we covered a lot. I guess, okay, I will ask if you might provide one last thing of like maybe overall advice on this topic. And then I would like to hear you brag about 3 things before we end this.
Okay. So overall, I think my best compilation or concept of how to bust limiting money beliefs is stop thinking about the money, start thinking about the feeling, start thinking about your worth, and start thinking about the fact that you deserve everything. And so if you deserve everything, you can have anything. As long as you're doing no harm to others. I always like to put that in there. Most of the people who will be watching this will understand that innately, but it always helps to say so. And then 3 brags would be, we are already filling up our next cohort of the Forgotten Storytellers, which is one of my other greatest joys. I had a conversation today with the person who runs the Astromagia conference, and I am one of the speakers this year, actually educating current magicians and astromages on how to read the ancient text without feeling intimidated, and don't let the text make you feel stupid because you're not and they're easy. And then the third is I am going to Tahoe tomorrow for the current Forgotten Storytellers writing retreat, which is another one of my greatest joys, to be able to be there with those people that, I mean, you actually did the program, and we always appreciate that. It's just so fun. And it's one of those, like, I can't believe I get to do this in life, but it's supported every time we try it again. So I'm glad that it continues to be useful to others and joyful for us.
Yes. Well, one good brag, yay! Okay, I had something pop in my mind about money-related things, and this is also a life-related things. You never have to repeat a mistake unless you have to repeat a mistake. And even then, maybe it was never the mistake that you thought it was. Maybe it was just you had to reanalyze it in order to move forward with the best foot. So think about the mistakes, I think. Think about why you think they're mistakes, and understand maybe they weren't, but maybe there was something left to learn. Let's see, bragging. So I just got back from New Orleans. That was a super enlightening experience, and that was with my Patreon community group, some of the members who came. Learned a lot about that, and talked to some ghosts, and I think we did some good work, which was not expected, but psychopomp stuff, there we are. Yeah, I am. Ooh, I'm going to Seattle for a week for my friend's, one of my best friend's weddings. I'm super excited. And the brag here is that I'm in a position where I can afford to do that and I can afford to support my friend and also give myself time to have a good time by people who don't know me from the internet. So I'm really excited about that. Um, the other thing is I'll just bring it back to where I am. I'm so happy to be where I am. I love Wilmington. Every time I go somewhere else, I'm always just like, this is great. I can't wait to go home. It's taken me a long time to get to a place where I really felt like I had a beautiful home to come back to. It's not perfect, but no place is. But I love this place, and I'm very fortunate to be where I am and to have found a place where I feel fits so well with who I am.
Mhm. Good brags. Loved those.
Thank you.
Tough to serve.
Well, I will say for anybody watching this on YouTube, because I will repost it on YouTube, I will leave all of your links and your YouTube page and all the stuff. You have a Patreon, you have a YouTube page, just whatever you want me to link on there, I will absolutely do so and I will tag you.
My Patreon is my new favorite thing because we do a traditional source text book club. And so we read stuff together that helps you believe magic or that helps you use it and empowers you to be able to believe in it because you know where it comes from. And so to me, again, research. When you've researched something, you're unshakable in the belief because you know why. You know why you believe it. You know that it works. So that's my favorite thing right now.
Yeah, I'll kind of piggyback off of that as well. I'm super grateful to have Patreons, people who invest in what I do, but also I feel are investing in themselves because all my courses are up on Patreon. It starts at $10 a month for the courses, and you can get 10 right now for $10.
Amazing.
So, but yeah, well, thank you for your time. It is always so lovely talking to you.
Thank you so much. I know this post Mercury retrograde has still felt a little Mercury retrograde, so thank you for being able to jump on, and I hope that you take the rest of the day and go make some magic. I'm kidding, but take care of yourself and have a gentle day.
You as well. Thanks everybody for joining.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Bye.